But man, we're divorcing for the stupidest things.
Does he go to work? Because, I mean, we live in a society where some men don't want to work.
If I don't understand submission to Christ, good luck understanding mutual submission to each other.
As parents, be careful with projecting that onto our children and raising them in a performance-based world, because they will grow up and enter into marriage thinking that they have to perform.
My presence in your life should push you more toward Jesus. Your presence in my life should push me more toward Jesus. When does Julie feel the most loved? When do I feel the most respected? And what does it even mean when the Bible talks about respecting your own husband? Welcome back to the Good Life Podcast. I'm Carl. This is my wife, Julie. We are with you today. And the cool thing is, if they'll stick around to the end, we've got some questions that we're going to ask each other. Nothing crazy, but I don't know what your response is going to be. You don't know what my response is going to be. So this could go really good or it could get really awkward. So we'll see how it goes. So stick around to the end. And also, before we get started, I usually say this at the end. Thank you so much for watching, not because we need you to watch, but it is clearly making a difference in so many people's lives. You're liking, you're sharing, you're subscribing. You can do that right now. But we're coming off of a kickoff of the series. We've got issues, and we're talking about marriage, we're talking about family. This is week 2 of it. This past week, I preached a message just talking about, at Relevant Church, talking about serving one another, moving from selfishness to selflessness. And we gave some homework to the amount of people that have asked for that homework and who took the sheets and put them everywhere. I've actually been in the community 2 different times this week, and that homework's been referenced. And so I don't know. I guess it was basically 10 ways to serve your spouse this week. So I thought we could start off by me asking you, like, what can I expect from you this week? And we could go there from there.
Well, I don't know if you noticed, but when you came in today, I had done your clothes.
Okay.
I had the clothes that were in the laundry room.
Look at you.
I had put those away for you.
So I did notice there were some clothes stacked on my in the closet.
Yeah, I didn't know exactly where those go.
Well, thank you. See, look.
But I did hang up your shirt.
She asked me to ask her that so she could brag. No, I'm totally kidding.
No, I did not.
No, that's cool. So those are things that, like, clothes are a big thing for me in a weird way, because it's like every time I go to wash my clothes, it feels like our oldest washes his clothes every day. It feels like
a lot.
Wash, dry. And every time I go to wash my clothes, I'm like, who put something in the wash? And then I will wash them, and then I'll have to leave, and then they don't get dry. So that's so thank you. It's a point of contention sometimes. It's crazy now that we have 2 teenage boys, and then you and I, it's hard to get everything washed in, the times we're home.
Yeah. The trend a few years ago when you were building new homes, or people were putting in a second laundry room. And I was like, why would you ever do that? It seems, kind of a waste. Now I'm like, oh, I get it.
How bougie are we talking about? Let's get a second laundry room.
Yeah, right? No, we don't need one. But I was just saying, I can understand why people were like, oh, that would be helpful.
But true story, when we designed this house, we were adamant about the fact of finding a way very close to our bedroom and our closet to get to the laundry room.
Yes, and that has made doing laundry for you and me a lot, because it's our nemesis.
Except
together.
At 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, our oldest is slamming the door and we can hear it to the bathroom.
Yes.
So thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
So I said this Sunday, which is a very interesting conversation. I'm hoping we make it through this whole podcast without me having a cough and spell and all that. But I said this line, and I just believe it's so true in every area of our life, and that is that the gospel of Jesus Christ dismantles selfishness. If you're going to follow Jesus, if we're going to lay down our life for the cause of Christ, then we don't have a right to be selfish. And Jesus emptied himself. He emptied himself of his heavenly, state. As the Son of God comes, lives as a man on earth. He emptied himself to death on a cross. And so we're going to get back to that conversation in Ephesians about death. Let me give a quick review. If you did not watch the message, you can watch it right here on this YouTube channel if you're watching on YouTube. If not, it's Relevant Church in Locust Grove, Georgia. But let's talk briefly for the listeners who may be tuning in about marriage, specifically in the Roman world, because we're in this series on Romans and we're digging in. We don't have time to get through all of Romans, but we started in Romans 1, spent a lot of time there. And we talked about what does marriage look like in the Roman culture. And then we jumped obviously to Romans chapter 12 this week. But marriage in the first century Roman world, and this is not just in Rome, the Roman world, they controlled most of the world at that time. It was not built on romance. So it wasn't a feeling. It wasn't like, oohs and ahs. And it wasn't even really about covenant or devotion. it was so much about advantage, especially what men could get. What men could build their empires, legacy, control, reputation. It was a transactional thing. And so the husband was ultimately trying to build some legal authority. He wanted to have, he had sexual freedom, social dominance. So nothing, I think this is important because when we get to Ephesians 5 in a few moments, one of the things that is so hard is we look at it through a filter of maybe modern day culture and some of the things that Paul writes about women submitting to your husbands, wives. I mean, husbands lay down your, life for your spouse. What does that even mean? Well, into a Roman culture who was all about men getting the honor of women, women honoring and submitting to all men, Paul comes with some pretty aggressive terms here. And so the message about marriage, or the idea behind marriage was not mutual. It was basically a transaction. And so it was structured around power, structured around selfishness. We talked about how it was a strategy to get wealthy, build your empire, whatever the case may be. And so today I want us to shift a little bit to semi-confusing, controversial passage, some things been taken out of context from Romans chapter 12 to Ephesians 5. Before we do, one of the things that is important to understand is Ephesus, which we got to visit this past year. I'd love to hear you just share some thoughts on that. We went to visit Ephesus. Ephesus is inside the Roman Empire at the time. It was a city inside the system, and it was under the Roman rule. So they had a lot of the same structures and hierarchies about marriage. But before we go into that, Ephesus was pretty remarkable.
Oh, it was, yeah. It was probably the highlight of the trip that we were on. And we had been to several other areas before and seen like the ruins of these cities and things like that. And you can tell, there was something there, and you can kind of put two and two together and just look at the landscape.
Almost ruins in a lot of places.
Yeah, very much so. And so when we went to Ephesus, first of all, our guide was incredible, very knowledgeable. And I remember when we first walked up to like the first site that we saw, and everybody was just like, wow, just kind of in awe. And our guide said to us, oh, if you're saying wow now, just wait. And I remember thinking, well, what more could there be? Because this is already better than what we've seen. And just walking through Ephesus, first of all, it's quite a walk. It's not just this little spot or this little place. You can't see all of it from one area. And so
there were all those structures where they were still excavating that were covering a portion.
Yes, I can't even remember. What did they say? Like 10% of it was
was a
visible.
Very small portion,
and
was
the
even
rest
excavated already.
Yeah, was still needing to be excavated. In fact, there was a team there working while we were there on the theater to excavate more of that. But I think what really struck me is just we walked down the road that was in the middle of Ephesus, and our guide was telling us, oh, this is the library, this was someone's house, and just you could almost feel a sense of what was going on there. And so I just found that to be incredible.
Yeah, and when we were on that journey, we went to Corinth, and we're overlooking the city where really where the ships would come in and the trade would happen. And as we're on that, we're realizing these are all parts of the Roman Empire.
Yes.
And like Paul's ultimate goal was to get to Rome, to take the gospel to Rome. That's what we kept hearing over and over. So he's writing to this church at Ephesus, which is now the lights go off. You're like, the lights go on. It's like, wow, we've been there. We've walked part of that. And so it gives a different context. And so he's writing to the church at Ephesus. He's writing inside the Roman kind of hierarchical system about marriage. And so when he writes about marriage, he's speaking specifically to a culture shaped by domination and hierarchy. And so in Romans 12, he tells us something. I read this Sunday, and it's really a crux of the book, The Good Life, too. Be transformed by a new way of thinking, Romans 12:1. It lays the foundation really for if you're going to be married. And Paul gets into Christian relationships later in all relationships. We applied a lot of that specifically to marriage this past week in verses 9 and 10 of Romans 12. But he gets to this conversation around, basically present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing unto God. This is your spiritual act of worship. And I've tried to it's so hard to get all this in on a Sunday, 35, 40 minutes. But if we can't lay our life down and submit our bodies to Christ, submit everything that we are to Christ as a living sacrifice daily, we'll never do it in our marriages. And so if I can't if I don't understand submission to Christ, good luck understanding mutual submission to each other. And so he says, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. And so then he goes on to say, do not conform any longer to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. This is so applicable to our marriage. If we're not willing to lay down our life as a living sacrifice to God first, but then to one another, and not look at how the world talks about marriage. We've had a lot of conversations on this podcast about that, but what does God say about marriage, and what is Ephesians 5 is going to tell us today, really about how we're to work together in marriage. And so marriage is going to show us a pattern, and it's going to be one of two patterns. It's going to be this selfish modern day cultural pattern. It is one way of looking at marriage. Or what is the biblical pattern? What does he mean by be transformed by a new way of thinking? How should we think about marriage? And so what I thought we could do is just walk through, and I would love to hear your thoughts, a list of type patterns we've heard either in counseling, which I don't know if our list, you haven't said this now, but you're going for your master's in counseling, which I'm excited for you on that. That's been one of the highlights, I think, of this year, to watch you study some of that kind of stuff. And you've really, in the last year and a half, working with some people who have, you mentioned this on one of the previous podcasts, some real deep issues in marriage. It's really giving you a heart for marriage and family. And so let's just talk about some of these patterns that we see, cultural patterns. One is, we'll just call them what they are, the happiness pattern, which just simply says, marriage exists to make me happy. Let's be real honest. We'll probably get pretty raw on this podcast before it's over. We've been married almost 26 years. How much, just you can be as transparent as we want. How much do I just make you happy? I mean, that's a very fleeting endeavor.
Yeah. I think it's almost a fallacy to even think that your spouse can make you happy.
Yeah.
I've seen where a lot of people who have had an unhealthy past, they somehow have this concept that if they get married, then they'll be good. Things will be fun. Things will be exciting.
Yeah.
And, of course, there's a honeymoon phase and all of that for most marriages. It's proven that not all marriages have a honeymoon phase, but most do. But that is a very short period of time. And so happiness in regard to your spouse making you happy is almost a myth.
Yeah.
You can have fun together. You can be happy together and have a thriving marriage, but to put that responsibility and it's almost a burden on your spouse.
And it's even the wrong filter to look through. That's a very selfish filter.
Yes.
So I remember we were on a health journey, and one of the things, I don't know who said this to us, but basically you approach food in two ways. It's either fun or fuel. And I think when our mindset shifted that food is more about fuel, our whole relationship with food shifted. I know that sounds weird, but like when it's fun, you just keep going to the pantry. You keep trying to get your fill. Like that's going to
brownies are fun.
They are fun. And yes,
cookies.
But we have this kind of innate to keep going back for more. I think we treat marriage the same way. Like, sure, it ought to be enjoyable. You ought to find joy in your marriage. But the problem is we put, like you said, the burden of happiness on the other person. Now, I think it's entirely possible to be lonely, unhappy, frustrated. All those things are normal things in marriage. But I'm just simply saying, your focus in marriage cannot be, does this person make me happy? Because if that's the case, you'll never lay down your life for your spouse.
Well, there are going to be days when they don't make you happy. There are going to be days when they frustrate you or make you angry or, all the emotions. And so if you're solely getting married to be happy, how do you reconcile the fact that there's going to be a lot of days when that emotion's not there?
So let me ask you this question. I throw curveballs at you and you just kind of roll
all the time.
Yeah. So is it safe to say that happiness is a byproduct of a healthy marriage?
Sure.
But it's not the end goal of the marriage?
No.
Okay,
no,
cool.
not at all.
So yeah, I don't want you to think I don't want you to have a happy marriage.
Oh yeah, don't marry somebody that makes you miserable.
Yes.
Like if you know that,
but your goal is not happiness, because then the journey to get there is all jacked up.
Yes.
So it's not really self-reflective; it's more inward focused.
You're going to experience a lot of letdowns.
Yeah, cool. Number 2, the consumer pattern. This is, for lack of a better term, marriage exists to meet my needs. Now, I think some of these two things go hand in hand. If my needs are met, I'm happier. That's kind of a false sense. But let's be real honest. Every need can be met, and you still not be happy. I mean, every need, I mean, there's some things that are strictly between you and God. So let's talk the consumer pattern. Let's be honest. When we got married, I'll speak for myself. I was not necessarily, oh yeah, okay, lay down your life for your spouse, but I still had a consumer mindset coming into marriage. And so maybe you have some examples of how I did that, maybe some things you struggle with. How do we overcome maybe the consumer mindset? Any thoughts on any of that?
I think that's interesting. Right off the top of my head, I can't remember. This is, it's a curveball to have to go back and remember almost 26 years ago. But what I do know is we are all raised in a consumer society.
Yeah.
And we are taught this. It's part of who we are as Americans, to have a consumer mentality. We're really not taught sacrifice and service.
Right.
And so I think it's almost innate for us to go into marriage with somewhat of a consumer mentality. And it takes maturity to really step back and even identify that in your own self to realize, oh, maybe I do have a consumer mentality towards my spouse or towards my marriage. That's obviously the first step in figuring that out. But that's even hard because then that requires self-reflection and, inward diagnosis and all of that. And that's just really hard because I think you
feel like a failure.
Yeah. And we do want our needs met. We do want satisfaction and those kinds of things. And so that's part of who we are as human beings too. So it's a lot to kind of process and reconcile together.
So I think you said a couple thoughts. You thought about consumer and contributor. You didn't use the word contributor. I teach this all the time in our church. You can be a consumer of things here at church, or you can contribute to the kingdom. That's what we call it, partnership in the gospel. And so when you talk about contributing, you're talking about partnering together. And I think if couples would come to the table every day and say, how can I contribute to this marriage today? How can I contribute to maybe bringing joy, bringing honor, bringing, some kind of fulfillment to my spouse? It's a game changer. It goes back to out serving one another. And so I think just like it comes to church, when it comes, you either come with a consumer, what do I get out of this, or a contributor, what can I give to this mentality? Yeah,
I think that's good. I think we can kind of reverse the language and say, what am I getting, but what am I contributing to this marriage? Yeah. And that's definitely a reflective.
And I think one of the biggest struggles for me was, through some counseling journeys and various times, is I realized we tend to fall into this trap without knowing it. We can do a lot of the right things for the wrong reasons and all that kind of stuff. And really we're just, rather than just laying down our life, there's still this kind of weird expectation at times. And so I think also going back to the first one, happiness is a byproduct of a healthy marriage, generally speaking. I also think, but if you don't deal with yourself, you're never going to find true joy and happiness. But I think when it comes to your needs being met, while it's not a consumer mindset, I think regularly meeting the needs of your spouse is what we should always try to do. And, obviously you can't meet every need all the time. That's stupid. But a practice of saying yes to things, and whatever those needs are, they vary for, temperaments, love styles, and everything else. And so number 3, this one really irks me because I see this all the time. And I want to talk about this one specifically as it relates to young adults getting married and even married to people our age. But then later in life, I want to kind of flip the script and talk about this one, what I call the independence pattern. And so this is like, I'm not necessarily going to lose myself in this relationship. So here's the dichotomy. And I just thought of this as we're sitting here. When people are young, they get married, or even people our age, is like, we have separate checking accounts because of whatever. That's my money. That's this. We file taxes this way. Like we still keep our independence, and we don't develop what I would call, I don't want codependence, but there's something called interdependence. How are we interdependent upon one another? How do we make budgets together? How do we build life together for the kingdom of God? And ultimately marriage, we're going to see in a little bit, is a reflection of Christ and his church and partnering together for the gospel. How do we do that in the context of marriage? So what I see younger people, and even people who've been married for years, is like, she has her account, I have mine. She has her money. She gets this. It's like, what are we doing? But then fast forward, this is what hits in the older generation. Now, people don't get married at all, but move in and cohabitate so they don't lose their previous spouse's death benefits.
Yes.
And I'm like, either you're all in or you're not. And so let's talk the independent. I don't want to be interdependent. kind of want it my way. I don't want to sacrifice everything or give up. Like either go all in or don't.
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes from maybe the household that they were raised in. You know, I grew up where everything was merged in our family, checking accounts, everything. And so I don't even remember the first time that I heard of someone doing separate checking accounts or whatever. And so, but I do remember that it was not commonplace for me. You know, it wasn't how I was taught or brought up. And so we are living in a generation of people who have kept things separate. And so their children see that. Your children see everything. And whether you think they do or not, you know, they pick up on things that you say. And so they'll realize, oh, mom buys this, dad buys that. It's not all merged. And then when they get married, it's like, well, it's abnormal for them to merge things.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that is very common now that happens.
This is a rhetorical question here, but I think as knowing how you're wired, how I'm wired, we've been married almost 26 years. I don't understand how you're independent with your checking accounts, with, you know, you don't really, but yet you want to merge and have physical and sexual intimacy.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, again, I'm just processing a weird dichotomy. Like, I want to be all in here, but not all in here. Like, what does that mean?
Well, I think from a female's perspective, that would feel very odd. I mean, you could almost feel taken advantage of, or just like, oh, this is more important than that. You know, like to me, that would be a lot to process.
So, yeah, I would think there was a little, yes, I think there would be a little bit of like, yeah, it just feels like we kind of have this over here, this bag over here, but then we got this bag over here. It's like,
it feels like there's a boundary, there's a wall, there's some kind of division of separation.
So I think as we're talking about that, and the answer I think is obviously you're either all in or you're not. And there's a lot of people who are trying to experience intimacy, but are living independently.
Well, and I think you also go back to what the Bible says about marriage, that the two become one flesh.
Right.
And so like, that's a complete merger. That's, you know, nothing is separate when you become one flesh. And so why would we think that we could separate things out?
It's just a very confusing new pattern. But anyway, back to it. I won't lose myself totally in this relationship. Mm-hmm. I'm keeping a little bit of my independence, and that's a great, to become one. It's not 50-50, it's 100-100. Mm-hmm. All right, here's the fourth pattern we see. This was one that I had fallen trapped to. We talked about it in the codependency, the performance pattern. Mm-hmm. If I do enough, if I can earn love, if I can, you know, be good enough, then I'll get love in return. When I preached the message on codependency and that podcast released, everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, we had so many people go, I didn't realize how codependent I was. Right. I didn't realize how much I was performing. We've already talked about that a lot, but the performance pattern is a very frustrating thing because you feel like you're constantly living in a hamster wheel and you constantly have to perform. And like, in some ways it's exhausting for both parties. Sure. Even the person you're like, if you're going to do it, don't do it for nothing in return. Don't make me feel obligated. You know, both parties should be serving and being selfless, but not performing.
Yeah. And I think we have to, as parents, be careful with projecting that onto our children and raising them in a performance-based world. And because they will grow up and enter into marriage thinking that they have to perform. And so we have to be very careful about what we praise in our kids. Yeah, I mean, it's great if your kids succeed and all, but the bigger thing is to acknowledge their character in something, in a situation.
So you're talking a little bit about some of the things that I had to deal with, but at the same time, I think you just said something that I thought was fascinating. Your kids are also watching what gets rewarded in the home between the spouses. And so if mom or dad's constantly, you know, doing that, and then that gets, it's like you're setting them up to perform. Yep. And one of the things we've learned, I think we've taught about in our marriage now off and on, is like, what are the things we didn't do right that we want to set our kids up to do better? Yeah. And so I think that would be a great one. And here's the last one. This is the one that I see when it all hits the fan, we have the exit pattern. This is divorce. This is why we have divorce, remarriage, and the second marriage doesn't last, you know, as long as the first. The success rate is down. And the idea is if it stops working for me, I'm free to leave. And so let me kind of talk about divorce for a minute, because I'm not going to get into it in the series. So let me talk about it. In the Old Testament, you know, people say, well, God permits divorce. And he looks back at Moses, and in the Old Testament, and there were women that men were divorcing women and sending the women out of their home. And the woman would now have to go back to her family. And when she went back to her family, the question is, why did you get kicked out of your home? Why are you? And the assumption would be, what did the woman do wrong?
Right.
Because women are supposed to submit, and there's all this stuff. And so what did the woman do wrong? So she was seen as, either an adulterer, unfaithful, people, all the questions surrounding. So Moses tells them, if you're going to divorce, send her home with a certificate of divorce, so that when she gets home, they'll go, oh, it ain't on you, it's on him. That is not God permitting divorce. Obviously, if there's sexual promiscuity, infidelity, ongoing things of that nature, and abuse, we have to have tough conversations about how to protect the person in the home. But man, we're divorcing for the stupidest things. And we just don't get along. We have irreconcilable differences. She has her money, I have mine. I mean, it's just, and I'm like, it's a slap in the face of God. This is a covenant. And so while a lot of people are listening that have gone through a divorce, again, I want to say this. We're not beating you up for your past. I want you to be transformed by a new way of thinking for your future. We got a lot of people thinking about divorce right now. And I'm like, you have zero, grow up. Grow up a little bit. And now there's obviously some harsh ones that I'm not, but it's not my job to judge everybody's situation. But when the divorce rate in the church is not much different than the world, we have a problem.
I think it's only a few percentages lower. And being on the other side of that, walking with people who have contemplated divorce or have had very tragic things happen in their marriages, I've seen a lot of people recover. I've seen a lot of people walk through some very hard steps by themselves and together.
That's important.
And they've reconciled. And so I think our society, again, consumer, microwave mentality, all of that, we are just used to things quick and easy. And when something happens in your marriage, or even if it's been a long-standing issue, it's not going to be fixed overnight. You're not, it's just hard.
It's a transformation.
Yes.
Again, you have the caterpillar, cocoon, butterfly. Long before the butterfly, there's a transformation that has to happen. And it's a stalling period. It feels long and hard. And then the butterflies will break out of the cocoon. There's all of that that goes in. And that's the language we see in Romans 12. And so at the core of all these issues, though, are this question is, what do I get out of marriage? That's what people are asking. And so I said Sunday that usually marriage does not end or split or just blow up because somebody decides to have an affair, or it's like a little by little disengaging, disconnecting, withdrawing. And now there's this distance. And so Romans 12 says, you're going to be a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing unto God. This is your spiritual act of worship. And then we get down to Ephesians, and it says you basically do it unto the Lord. So part of your serving your spouse is worship to God. And we'll see that. So Paul gives us a better pattern in Ephesians 5. I'm going to read it. It's a brand new, crazy, off-the-wall idea because they're like, that's not the way we do marriage. And he says this, and we'll unpack it together, have a little fun here. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Again, same language. Be transformed by new way of thinking. Your body's a living sacrifice, and you're now sacrificing and submitting one to another out of reverence for Christ. Going back to Romans 12. Wives, and here's where it gets hairy. Man, I'm just going to say this. I have friends that have said things about this, and some person, well, I'm not going to mention names. There are people that all they do is grift around and try to destroy people. And people get hung up on this idea, wives, submit to your husbands, whether you're complementarian or egalitarian, and what that means. And that's just some languages like, are you equal? Do you complement? What is the whole thing there? And just some theology that sometimes I think we get so locked into, we miss the whole point. But at the end of the day, this idea of submit to your own husbands as you do to the Lord has been taken out of context and misrepresented. And then people have been bashed for things they never said because they've been misrepresented. I'll give you one example. Maybe we'll do this on the podcast at some point. A few years ago, we had a video go viral about, and I mentioned this, I think, in one of the services on Sunday, and it has about 20 million views. And it was just simply saying women need 10 to 12 non-sexual hugs a day. And then I said, ladies, he needs affirmation. So like, if he does something good, tell him you're grateful he brought you to church today. The women in the comments, if people would send me this, look, this was on this site. It was going everywhere. the women in the why you got to tell a man this? He ought to just know. And I'm thinking to myself, good luck, like submitting to your husband when you won't even be kind to your husband. And I jokingly said this Sunday because Proverbs said better to live, on a roof, to pitch a tent on the rooftop than live in a house with a nagging wife. And so Paul is addressing this dysfunction in the Roman Empire. You have hierarchy and men are in charge, women are submitting. There's this radical language where women are submitting to all men. And then Paul says in verse 22, something so counterculture. He says, submit to your own husbands. So we've taken this whole thing out of context and be like, why do women have to submit to men? Actually, Paul's saying, stop submitting to all these men. You got one man you're loyal to.
Right.
You don't submit to all these other men. You chose that. Now, in that particular culture, they obviously weren't. Some of the women didn't have necessarily, but he's saying, find someone, get married, love one another. Don't be love sincerely. Don't be strategic in it. Don't try to lay down your life and then submit to one another. You don't owe anything to any other man. So he's actually bringing women up, not putting women down here. Just give some thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I'm the best one to comment on this because I've never really had a problem with this. I've never looked at it as putting women down or being less than or anything like that because, this passage also talks about how Christ, died for his bride, died for his church. And so if your husband is treating you as Christ has treated the church and he's honoring you, submission, I don't know. It's never felt like submission to me. It's just always felt like these were the roles. This is how it was. And I think in the past when we've talked about this, I've commented and said to have to lead spiritually and carry the burden of our household in that regard would be a burden for me. And so I don't think I'm meant to do that. I don't think that I'm built to do that. That's not my role. And so when I look at this, I've always been grateful for this in the sense that it has kind of defined the role that I have as a wife and not put me in a place where I felt burdened. Or unqualified.
Well, and I think this is gold. There's so many scriptures we could go to talk about the weight. And when we stand before God as men, the weight that are on our shoulders when we stand before God.
Sure.
That is not to say we're better. Listen, to your point, you guys give birth to children and that's your labor pains. And that's a lot of, and I understand we live in a fallen culture and there's a lot of other things. But when we stand before God, God's going to look at me and say, how did you shepherd your family? And that's where, so why do you think, and why, there's a varying reasons, we'll just hit a few. Why do you think women get so hung up on this? Oh my God, why would I submit? Why can't he just supposed to, why do women get so worked up? I have a lot of thoughts, but I'm leaning into you for a second.
I think there's a lot of reasons that we could probably discuss. I think one that comes to the top of my head is there's probably some broken relationship with a male in their life that.
And it could be their husband or their father.
It could be their husband. It could be their father. And, we do live in a world where there's a lot of mistreatment by males.
Yes.
Let's just face it. There is. And there's some really horrible things that males can do to women. And, it's awful. And so those women who have experienced any kind of, brokenness in a relationship, trust, anything like that, I think they look at this and they're like, I don't want to submit to anybody. That's scary. I think that they could see it as being scary. I will say I speak from a perspective where I've not experienced broken relationships with men in my life. I'm a part of a family where men have been faithful, where they do treat their wives as with honor and dignity. And so that is my frame of reference. Yeah. And I watch the females in my circle, and this doesn't seem to be an issue, but many of them have had the same experience I have.
Yeah.
And so I think it is hard when there's broken trust or there's been mistreatment or harm done to a woman. I think it can taint their perspective.
So when I read this passage, there's not an ounce of me, it's not to float my boat, but I just think this should be true of all men of God, right? There's not an ounce of me that's like, yeah, woman, you need to submit to me. That I don't read this passage that any man who reads the passage that way has other issues.
Yeah, I think when I read that passage and I think of men, I think of the responsibility that they have. It's a weight.
Well, and I mean, the Bible says, I think it's in Peter, it says, any man who does not provide for the needs of his family has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever.
Yeah.
They don't say that to women.
Right.
So it's my responsibility to make sure the bills are paid and my family has a roof. Like, I got to provide for the needs of my family. So I'm like, if that's the case, there ought to be some level of honor and respect and that sort of thing. But at the same time, like you said, he goes on to say, for the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so wives should submit to your husbands in everything. Now, I'll get to verse 33 in a minute, but if there's a whole nother passage there that talks about husbands, lay down your wife as Christ. And we're going to get to that in this podcast series over the next few weeks. But what does it mean to lay down your wife for your wife? And so for me as a man, if I'm constantly dying to self, why wouldn't we have that mutual? That is my way of mutually submitting, right? I submit because I'm giving up everything. That's the context here, that I lay down my life daily. That is my form of submission. Now you come along and let's partner in this submission thing together and mutually submit and build a life together. And I think the husband dies daily. The wife submits daily. And I think those words can be you can get hung up on that in American culture. But yeah, I think any couple that goes back to the scripture as leverage, now you got to, like, I'm looking at this is your, I'm the head of that's a dangerous proposition.
Yeah. I don't think this scripture is meant to be used as leverage and a weapon. And that to someone who's on the receiving end of that can feel abusive. And that's not doing anything to promote Christ and how we should honor one another.
Yeah. Yeah. So he goes on to say, we'll skip down a few verses at the end. He ends it with this. However, each of you must love his own wife as he loves himself. Fascinating. He loved his own wife as he loves himself. So put that you're equals. And the wife must respect her husband. Love and respect. We're going to get to that in a minute. There's a whole book out there, some great stuff, some controversial stuff in the book. We'll get to some of that. It's called Love and Respect by Egrich Emerson, I think is his name. So let's just talk for briefly. We had the patterns of this world, but I think Paul is expressing here a pattern of submission. Nothing in the world is about submission anymore. It's all about me. It's all about, don't let anybody control you. You do you. We don't even submit to Christ anymore. And so we want to have our own truth. So he says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. My submission to you, your submission to me. And here's the thing. It's a give and take. It's not negotiation. It's just like, all right, sometimes we'll do it your way. Sometimes we'll do it my way. And we're not going to keep score on that, and both parties have to have that out-serving one another mentality. So he says, submit to one another out of reverence to Christ. And so he's basically saying, think about this. Marriage doesn't start with power. It starts with surrender. In that Roman culture, men took power. They were in charge. And he's like, no. The way you lead is to lay down your life. And this is like a cultural blasphemy, really. When Paul says, wives, submit to your own husbands, just by way of review, he's not saying, you see that man right there? You go, no, he's saying, you're submitting to all men. Focus on building mutual submission with your husband. That's the only man you need to worry about. And then he punches the men in the face and says, by the way, you stop lording over her and you lay down your life for her. And that's why I think context matters. And so when you walk the streets of Ephesus, you see Ephesus. Now I can actually envision Paul walking around, writing, teaching, doing. Then I'm like, oh my goodness, it just brings the Bible to life.
It's funny because, people always talk about, like, if you could live in a different time than when you were when you're alive now. And I would love to have lived in the time where Paul was saying some of this stuff to the Roman culture, because it's such a dichotomy for them. And, like, I just love when people have the boldness to speak on things that are controversial and speak against something that is wrong. And I don't necessarily have that in me sometimes. It's not, I know it, but to actually speak it. So I love the boldness that Paul has to, this was the Roman Empire. Right. Let's face it.
And he's literally going around stirring up, not in a positive way, he's stirring up all kinds of controversy in every city he can get to.
Yes, for the Roman Empire. And I would have loved to have seen their response and how he handled that, but just to be there and hear him saying this stuff.
So he visited the jail in Philippi.
Yeah.
Everywhere he went, he knew what he was. So he stood on Mars Hill where he's standing before the Areopagus. He's
right in the middle of everything,
with everything. And he's addressing that. And he's saying, basically calling out the unknown God. And he's saying, to him we live and move and have our being. He's quoting philosophers and Greek poets of the day. And he's punching them right in the throat. And it's like everywhere Paul goes, he makes a habit of saying, just like Romans 1, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. Let me hit you in the face with it. This is what he's doing here. When it comes to marriage, he's saying, y'all screwed it up. It's all wrong. Let me give you something that's so countercultural that it's probably going to make you mad.
Yeah. And even when he was in the prison in Philippi, I mean, it was right there. And I mean, the marketplace, he would have heard everything. They would have heard him. I mean, just proximity was so close.
And so I think when I read this, I'm like, we shouldn't be ashamed of what the Bible teaches about submission, headship, sacrifice, laying down your life. So let's talk about this term headship here for a minute. And then I want to get into a couple other things just about marriage, and then we'll talk. Okay. He says, for the husband is the head of the wife. Paul is not reinforcing Roman masculinity. He is redefining it. And what he's saying is not all men control women. No man controls a woman. It's her husband that she submits to while he lays down his life for her. She doesn't owe it to anybody else. So he's redefining this idea of submission, saying, no, y'all mutually submit to one another. When it comes right down to it, somebody has to make the decision. If the husband's a follower of Jesus, laying down his life, we're going to go with that direction. I don't know. I mean, I'll take it back to when we started Relevant Church in 2010. I was ready to plant this church 2 years before you even considered it. In theory, some people would say, you're supposed to submit and follow. I don't think that's what that means. When I laid down for that 18 to 24 months and just said, I'm going to pray and seek God and submit to the Lord, living sacrifice, finish well here, and see where God takes you on this journey. Now, by the time you are ready to come in, you don't come kicking and screaming, submitting like a baby. Right. You come in going, I'm bought in. We're doing this thing together.
Yeah. And I think that really served us well with planning the church. I was not ready. I had a distorted view of what church planting was. And your tendency, your temperament lends towards being impulsive or compulsive at times. And so I think, you could have said, we're doing this. I certainly wouldn't have stayed where we were living. I mean, I would have followed you because I'm not going to live there by myself, Well,
and the reality is in that season too, we had built a track record of that's how we do life. So that would have been an extreme thing for me to do. But
I think with you being patient, and in that process, I saw you not just sit back and pout or be mad at me or resentful, but you actually started reading books. You started having conversations with people, educating yourself about church planting. And so I think for me, it showed me, hey, he really is serious about this. This wasn't just like, oh, he ate some pizza and had a dream one night and said, we're going to plant a church. It was serious. That's what it showed me. And so it built some trust there, I think. Yeah. And let's face it, we were leaving a great place. We were serving well at a church, loved the people there. And so it was hard to leave. But once we walked through the steps and we weren't impulsive or compulsive about it, then I was like, okay, I can do this.
So do you remember when we went to the church planting assessment?
Oh yeah. I'll never forget it. God bless those people.
It was one of those things. If we had to go get approved to plant a church, not to prove we could have done it on our own, but to be under authority, which I think is important. And there was some funding that came along, not a ton, but there was funding, coaching. We went and sat and basically bared our soul before about a dozen people. And they basically asked us, they knew everything about us. I mean, it was painful, but it was a good painful because I thrive in those environments.
I don't.
You don't. You run from them, but you basically said, we're going to kind of trust this process. Yeah. So we go in and they have to get up and preach the first day. And it's weird. It's one of those things like, what do you mean preach to 12 people in a small room? I just want to see if you can communicate. So halfway through, I'm like thinking they're listening to my content and all this. And literally they're like, all right, you're done. I'm like, well, I'm not done. They're like, you're done. Yeah. We just want to see if you can talk. And then, so then they were like, I have to sell them on a vision because if they're going to put money toward it, they need to know, can you communicate vision? And there's a whole process.
It's a fair process.
Very fair. Actually, I think it's unfair many times because they don't do it. They don't come after planters hard enough because one of the things, and we've done this before. We've done many assessments.
We've been on the other side.
We have been on the assessment side. We've ran assessments and I'm like, if I can get the guy to quit, we want them to quit now before it's 2 years in and their marriage is destroyed.
Yes.
But I remember something that was that was asked to you, and I've grown a lot since then, but even I think your answer that day, you can tell us what you said or summarize it. But I got done and they said, Julie, join him up there. And I thought, okay, here they're going to ask me questions. For like 15 minutes, they didn't ask me not one question.
Right.
They drilled you.
Mm-hmm.
And the first question they asked was, is Carl aggressive?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I'm about to be aggressive, right? That's what I felt like. I'm like,
Punch you in the
stop,
face.
don't even go, And your response, can you summarize your response?
Yeah, I basically told, I mean, in those moments, you're just like, I mean, I probably was a deer in headlights, but you're faced with what do I say? But the truth was, yes, you're aggressive. You are aggressive. You've always been aggressive. I knew that when we were dating. But it's not a bad aggressive. It's not a mistreatment of me or anybody in our circle or anything like that. It's just you're aggressive when you're just a driven person. And so you go after whatever you feel like God's calling you to do. And so it's more of a drive. It can come off as aggression. But yeah, I was completely honest. So
well, but
it would have been, I wouldn't even know how to say, no, he's not aggressive. Like what explanation do I give to even,
why is he acting like this?
Yeah. Like, cause they already knew that they knew.
Wanted to see,
they wanted to see if I knew it and how I would respond.
What they were doing is digging with the questions they're asking Ephesians 5.
Yeah.
He can be aggressive, but does he submit to you?
Right.
Does he lay down his life for you?
Right.
Is he willing to die for you? Or is it about is he narcissistic and all of these things? And all of us that are wired a certain way can lend toward those things.
Sure.
What they want to know is, do you have the mind of Christ for your spouse?
Yeah.
And, but if going back to that season, if we had pulled the trigger 2 years earlier, you would not have answered that the same way if I'd have made you go to an assessment.
Right. Right. And I
said, yes, I don't want to be here today.
Well, and I think the brilliance on their part was to pick up on it and they probably picked up on it in some paperwork, not just the
counselors, everything else.
Not just the message that you spoke, but they already knew.
Yeah,
no,
that's good.
They knew.
Well, so here's what's happening here. Let's kind of finish this headship, because in that situation, that was a season where I was trying to lead our home somewhere else, away from where we were at, and what I felt like God was calling us to do. But there was a process and a step-by-step way we went about it. Because at the end of the day, what was more important is that this is right. Not 5 years into a church plant that's got 800 or 900 people, or we get, all of a sudden we're hating each other because you're kicking and screaming.
I mean, and the bottom line is ministry is hard on your marriage. Right. It just is. And
nobody knows the seat we sit in.
Yeah, and anybody that says differently, it's just untrue. I'm not calling them a liar and saying that they're intentionally lying.
Unaware.
But ministry can be hard. There are seasons where ministry is great for our marriage, and then there are times where it presents some issues that we have to work through. And so the last thing you want to do is approve someone and put your stamp on approval and say, oh yeah, go do this, and just ignore all the potential problems. It all has to be on the table.
Yeah. It's my biggest frustration with church planting today. We're a part of a great church planting network that's pretty rigorous that our church supports and funds, and it's great. But one of my biggest struggles with many church planting organizations is they don't focus on making sure the marriage is healthy enough. Yeah,
I think on the scale that we were scored on, one of the knockout factors is is your wife on board.
Spousal support.
Yeah, that's what it was called. And literally, you can pick up on it and it.
I remember we went to you asked me, we were getting ready to go for our final interview, and you said, what do you think they're going to say? I was like, I think they're going to approve us. Of course, I probably would have been dumbfounded if they hadn't, right? But what did I do wrong? But we sat down and they literally looked at you and like, it's a good thing you came along with him, because I'm not sure he'd have made it without you. And I'm thinking to myself, this woman doesn't even want to do this. And now she's like the I don't know. It's always been a good balance.
Talk to me this whole time. Yeah.
It's been a good balance. So Paul says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. So let's kind of unpack this. In that culture, he says, we got to move from dominance to devotion, because the male was dominating. The husband was, I'm devoted to I'm laying down my life. And from authority, moving from authority over lording over your wife, or in the Roman culture and even in Ephesus, to now that authority becomes sacrifice. And like that is countercultural language. And so in Roman culture and in the Roman Empire, masculinity was measured by power. Paul writes to that, lay down your life. Even husbands, you too submit to your wife. And so Paul says we're shifting from power And the whole theme, same thing we talked about Sunday, is to self-giving. How am I going to give myself? So Christ-centered love, let me just kind of run through this. Christ-centered love is not just merely affectionate. It's transformational. And so he talks about Christ loving the church, and we'll get more into this, but let me give you a couple things. When Christ died for the church and gave himself up, there were multiple reasons, but he wanted to see the church flourish. He wanted to see Christians live the life that we're called to live. He wanted to see a formation, a transformation in our life, and then he wanted to see us be whole. As a husband, that should be my goal for you. That should be a husband's goal for his wife. How can you flourish? Now listen, when you know this, it's maddening as a man trying to understand, as a woman trying to understand a man. We're just wired different. So it's a constant learning. And here's the other thing. We've talked about this. Our kids are getting older. A few years they're going to be out of the house. It's a whole new learning season. Yeah. Every season is a learning season. Mm-hmm. And if I'm doing things like when our kids were 2 years old and they're 18 and 14, we're not connecting. And so it's, how do I help you flourish? And really it's mutual. And so when Christ died for the church, that was the goal: flourishing, formation, wholeness. And so marriage is not about control. It is about cultivating a holiness in one another. We have failed on this many a times. My presence in your life should push you more toward Jesus. Your presence in my life should push me more toward Jesus. The greatest way to do that is to show Jesus to one another by serving one another. And so, I don't know, any other thoughts on that before we kind of get into some fun questions?
No, I think that's good.
Cool. So Paul says, love your wife as your own body. Marriage is no longer two people negotiating needs. It's one flesh, one life forever. And then he says, ultimately, marriage points to something beyond itself. We'll get into in the coming weeks, Christ and the church, that whole parallel. And ultimately, I think it's fascinating, and I'll say this, and kind of setting up some of the future podcasts, that marriage is a living picture of Christ's sacrificial love. How people ought to see Christian marriages. And I want you to lean in. If you're struggling with your marriage, thinking about divorce, everything's, you're just kind of living as independent, your marriage should be the greatest reflection of how Christ loves the church, and the church should love Christ. It is, Paul weaves that whole thing in and says that I'm really talking about Christ and the church, but you should live this way too. Mm-hmm. It's fascinating read. And so the world's pattern is, what do I get? The gospel pattern is, what can I give? So let's talk a little bit about these two words, love and respect, and then we'll ask some questions, okay? He says, verse 33, however, each of you must also love his own wife as he loves himself. This word it comes from the Greek word agape or agapeo. And then it says, the wife must respect her husband. So let's talk about this word love. This is a covenant love, a sacrificial love, and then a volitional love, which is interesting because it means it's a chosen love, not an emotional love. Mm-hmm. I don't do it because I feel like it. I do it because I'm choosing, which is a fascinating conversation. And it's not the same love. It's the same love that is used in verse 25 for Christ loving the church. Covenant, sacrificial, volitional. I took the initiative. I chose to die for you. That's the same thing that he's using there. It's not attraction. It's not romance. It's not chemistry. It's a self-giving commitment. And here's something I put in here. I choose to act for your flourishing regardless of my mood. Because let's be honest, some days we just don't feel like, I just want to go to bed, right? Mm-hmm. So now let's talk about respect, and then we'll ask some questions. The word respect here, this is the one that gets hung up a lot by some, especially female authors that really get tied up in this. And I tend to agree with some of them, but I think they get way over the top on some of this. The Greek word comes from where we get our word phobia, which is fascinating. That it says respect. We get our word phobia. If we're not careful, we'll think we should fear our husbands.
Right.
Let me clarify what this really means. This does not mean fear, intimidation, terror. It doesn't mean any of that. In its context, the best way I can describe it, I'll give you multiple ways and then we can talk about it. It means to treat your husband's role as weighty, to respect his role in your life, just like honoring one another, okay? To regard him and his position in the family with honor, to take him seriously in his role, and to revere his role. So I'm going to try to dumb this down, but I don't want it to become, I want it to be relational, not institutional, okay? We will say, like, we don't, depending on who's in office, when or where, I don't respect the president, but I respect the office of the president. Mm-hmm. So I might not agree with him. He might be an idiot, but I'm still, because of the position that he's in authority, and I'm going to respect the office of the president. I may totally disagree, might be a moron or whatever. So when it comes to our husbands and our spouses, from ladies' perspective, I'll hear, but he's not worthy of respect. He don't do anything worth respect. Okay. That's a real true statement for a lot of people. But how can you hold the role of husband in your life in a place of honor? Because if you don't do that, how will you ever mutually submit to one another? Does that make sense what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
And so it doesn't mean somebody's living perfectly. And there are men, like abusive men and all that kind of stuff. Like, you don't submit in a weird abusive way, but you say, you honor the role of male and husband in the marriage. I don't necessarily honor your behavior. I don't respect you, maybe your behavior, but I'm respecting the way God designed the family and you as the husband of the family. Now, we may have to set some boundaries because you're crazy, but I can still honor you and not insult you. And so, I don't know, from a woman's perspective, not living with the best of a man here, how do you navigate some of that?
I think it's hard. It would be something daily. I think that you would have to walk through. I think for most men, there are things that you can find you could find something honorable, something to respect. Does he go to work? Because, we live in a society where some men don't want to work, but does your husband go to work every day? Does he come home every day? It's finding those small things that even if he's not a follower of Christ, or he's got some wayward tendencies, or he half the time he's just not present or whatever, what is it that you can find and respect that aspect of him, respect that. And I'm not the best person to comment on these things because I haven't lived in those roles, but I've obviously sat with people who are in tough marriages where they're not, they don't have equal values, equal, beliefs about Christ or Christianity and being a Christ follower. And so that's where it becomes really hard.
Yeah, he's got a temper. He's an alcoholic.
Yes.
He's this, he's that.
Yes.
So here's the pushback that I get, and that my friends even get, that probably are a lot more hate than I get sometimes. One of the things that women would say when you would say, you just made this comment, well, he goes to work, he works hard. I'm just being honest.
They would say, why?
He ought to go to work.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to live with a woman like that. Yeah. I'm just being honest. That just comes off as catty, naggy.
Yeah. And look, technically he should go to work, right? He signed up to be married and to have a family, and he made that commitment. So that doesn't come with just
what is your character?
Sitting on your couch, so, but if that is the one thing that he does, then hold on to that and honor that about him, respect that about him. I agree, they should go to work, but
two things can be true at the same time.
Yes. But does it hurt to say,
yes, you're right, he should go to work. And you know what? You're right. You should be kind to him.
Right.
It's like both can be true at the same time.
I think it's more beneficial to say, hey, thanks for providing for our family, than not say those things in that situation.
Yeah. Now let me say some things to the men. Do more than go to work. You have like when you get home as a man, if you have a wife and kids, you have a whole nother day that starts when you get home. And that's just part of life. That's just part of being married and developing a family and honoring Christ, doing that unto the Lord. So don't make her have to search and find one thing to compliment on you. so let's push back on the men. But man, there is just this vitriol that we just want to this selfish, naggy, and men are cruel, mean, I'm just not being mean, but they can be controlling.
Yeah.
All men generally can have that nature at times. And so, it's a relational, we do want to keep the relationship aspect to it. A friend of mine says it this way: what you celebrate multiplies. What you criticize metastasizes. Mm-hmm. Meaning one multiplies. Look, I'm going to find the good thing. If I criticize, then it becomes hardened heart. It becomes like, okay, I'm going to dig my heels in. So find the things to celebrate. And this goes both ways, not just for ladies.
Sure.
So let's do some things. what respect does. So think of it like this. Respect is not approval of performance. It's recognition of covenant weight. It's like, I recognize you as the role that God's intended for you to be. So a wife, listen, so respect, here's a good line. Protects dignity without denying reality. Meaning I don't have to make you out to be some saint if you're not, but I can also respect and honor and protect your dignity. So a wife can confront, a wife should be able to challenge, and a wife should be able to speak truth to her husband without contempt, belittling, or dismissing. Both, you can do both at the same time. And so let's do some Q&A. I don't know. I just put in some questions and talking about love and respect. I might know what you're going to say because you said it before. I might not know, and I'm certain that we'll find some other questions. So love, respect. Here's some questions. Number one, I'll ask you, and then you can go the second one with me. When, in our relationship between you and I, when do you feel the most loved?
I would say when we do something like intentional together, maybe when you set aside time to do that, it can be as simple as going for a walk in the neighborhood or going out to dinner, going shopping, just something where I love shopping.
I get my coffee and follow along.
Yeah, on your phone usually. But just when we're doing something where we're together and there's not a lot of other distractions and noise that we're having to decipher through.
Well, one of the things that I've done recently that I'm trying to do better at, because I'm not the best at like asking questions and listening. And so you've been doing your counseling study to get your master's. And like I've been probing and asking like, so, asking questions, trying to get into your world. And I find myself drifting. I can find myself engaging for a few minutes and you're so excited and passionate about it. And now like you're talking about that more than, and usually you're just the other way around. I'm running my mouth and you're like, stop talking. But like you're so excited about that. And I think one of the things I'm trying to do to show love is just like, I do care, but I want you to know I care. And I'm asking questions. And I also want to know like what psychological moves you're pulling on me. So I'm totally kidding. So
scary, right?
All right. Go ahead.
Oh, I ask you the next one.
Sure, you ask me the next one.
Okay, when do you feel most respected?
Oh, wow. So, like I didn't know this was coming. Oh, wow.
I know, like you're surprised.
No, I haven't. I really did not put a lot of thought in this intentionally because I want to answer on the spot. I think when I feel most respected is when I'm seen or celebrated by you. Because it shows a level of honor, and not in the sense of like I need this massive praise, but to know that you saw not something I did as much as who I am, and that when that's honored and respected, so or celebrated, I should say. All right, here's where it gets ugly. When do you feel the least loved by me? I don't know if I really want to ask that. You can be honest.
That's a hard
We can always edit it.
Oh, that's a hard one.
This is your chance to unload.
Okay. I'll be really honest. I think when we're having a discussion, maybe when we're having a disagreement or an argument.
What are you talking about?
It's true. And you overtalk or interrupt me. And those two are different. Interrupting, because I do have a hard time expressing, feelings and just anything, whether I'm mad, angry, sad, or happy, you really wouldn't know a lot of times. And so if I'm at the point where I'm feeling like I can't express things.
Yep. I try to fix it immediately.
And you interrupt me, or when you overtalk a situation, it can, and we've talked about this, it feels like a lecture to me.
Yeah. Yeah. So full disclosure, I didn't know for years I was doing that. I was just like, we got to fix this. We got to go to bed till we fix this. And then I was just like, I'm driven. And so I just approached, and it's like, I wasn't very healthy looking back. And then you're like, all those years. And I'm like, well, I thought I was winning and I'm losing the whole time. Not winning an argument. I thought we were like trying to, because we're wired differently. Not only were you male and female differently, but we're totally wired differently when it comes to how we attack problems.
Sure. You
sit back, process. You're like, I'm like, let's just we'll just push buttons. I mean, like, we'll just figure it out. And it's worked for me in every area of my life. It does not work in marriage. You don't push buttons in marriage. But like in church stuff, I'm like, I mean, we did set up and tear down. We built campuses. We're getting ready to long-term make. I mean, just when it comes, I just push buttons. We're going to figure this thing out. Can't do that in marriage. Mm-hmm. And so like, cause you know, you can't just push, you got to be a little more methodical, a little more strategic, you know? And so for years, and then we went through some counseling, we navigated some stuff, and I've gotten a lot better at that. There's been a time even recently where I was just frustrated and I talked a whole lot. I just kind of lost it. Not in like temper wise, but I just kept on talking. And then I realized, man, that's a sign of my old self. And I don't want that because I know the damage that it did. And it makes somebody wired like you, even though it's not intended to harm, it just makes you shut down more. Mm-hmm. And so that's been a huge learning curve for me the last even 4 or 5 years. How do I not just because I'm feeling, you know, sometimes, and I think our counselor told me this, sometimes you got to say it and let them sit with the Holy Spirit about it. Mm-hmm. The problem is I want to be the Holy Spirit sometimes. You know what I mean? Does that sound accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
When do you feel the least respected?
Okay. This one is this is pretty easy. I think when I feel dismissed, I think, and I think it's crazy because one of the things Emerson says, in his book, Love and Respect, is a man, I'm summarizing it, basically, without respect, a man can't feel love. And so when I feel dismissed, it feels disrespectful, almost like I'm disregarded as a person, which is hard. Then how do you feel loved if you're disregarded? Right. And I think I'm a more expressionate person than you, but I'm more of a feeler. I don't know. We feel differently, but I'm definitely more animated in my emotions.
You're more of a feeler. I'm more of a thinker.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, but you can come off as a feeler when you're frustrated or you know, or that sort of thing, but you don't express it as much.
No.
So I think when I feel dismissed, unseen, almost the opposite of the other one, when I said I feel celebrated and seen. So I think those things go hand in hand. All right. Can you think of a time where your sacrifice or my sacrifice or my submission or my however you want it, deeply impacted you?
I think, and this.
I told you we didn't rehearse this.
And this was a long time ago, but I think it's a great example. It's not that there hasn't been any example since, but this is just a really good example. When we had our oldest son, Jace, I was fortunate enough to stay home, and he's 18. So this is how many years ago this was. And you were still working, and I love being home with him, but let's just face it, those days are hard and they feel long and they feel never ending. And I remember having to take care of him all day or getting to take care of him. I didn't have to. I got to take care of him. But then even in the evenings, there was a whole routine of getting him to bed and bathed and all that stuff. And so it was just exhausting. And I remember, I don't even know what had transpired, but you just asked me, what can I do to help you? And I said, if you would just get him ready for bed and put him to bed, because I'd been with him all day and I just needed like a breather. And so you were happy to do that. And ultimately that
for 18 years, I've been getting him ready for bed.
Yeah.
Not really, but you know what I mean?
But that led to a pattern that started then, that even when we had our second child, you did that. You always put the kids to bed for me. And it just, if nothing else, just gave me that 15 minutes or 30 minutes if they were still, hard to get to bed, whatever it was. It just gave me time to disconnect and to, I remember I'd go take a bath or go lay down in the bed just for a little bit, or shut the door, or, just
get away.
Yeah. It's kind of escape in my own home to just have some time just where I could.
But this is a good example of knowing each other in different seasons, because I still pray with the boys, but we go to bed many times before they do now, because they're, homeschooled, and the 18 they're playing video games. But they make fun of you now because the same pattern you started of going and taking your bath and going to bed. They like, Mom goes to bed at 8:30.
I know they call me grandma and all that, but I don't care.
You go in the room early, but you don't go to sleep early.
Right. And then they got on me the other day about that. You're going to go in there and watch TV or read. And I don't care. I don't care. Yeah, you're right. I am. I'm going in there because I've been with you all day.
Yeah. I used to stay up later. And not a lot later, but because they hang out with each other now, but I pray with them before I go to bed. And it's 18 years of that.
Yes.
And I guess it started by one question 18 years ago. And here's the other thing. You had to tell me. You had to say, this is what you can do.
Yeah.
But now the thing is it looks different. Like, what is that same thing now? And this season of life is what's harder. So, so I'll answer that same question because I said here. Can you think of a time where sacrifice or serving in some way deeply impacted me? I think the one moment I remember above everything else, and this is not, it wasn't so much that you made a sacrifice. It was your posture toward me that I at that moment, I felt like I wasn't alone. And it was about 6 years ago. You probably remember we were sitting on the couch at our old house and my back. And I was at a point, I was 40 years old and I had tears in my eyes. And I said, if I feel like this at 40, I don't want to live until 60. Mm-hmm. And I don't say things like that. And I remember like at that moment, and you came and sat on my leg and you just said, what do we need to do? Mm-hmm. And I felt support, maybe is a good word there, which made me feel like I wasn't alone. And I think that probably mattered to me because the seat that I sit in is a lonely seat. We talk about that a lot. I enjoy and love what I do. I wouldn't trade it for nothing, but it's lonely. Nobody knows. Mm-hmm. Not, even the people that have been with us that I love, that are high level leaders that know, they just don't know the things I think about at night laying down and just to know that I wasn't going to fight the battle of my back alone because loneliness has been a thing in my life too, at times of being an only child. I'm not blaming anybody for that, but I spent a lot of time alone as a kid. I had some injuries as a kid that I think, medicine wasn't as far along. We didn't know that maybe could have prohibited some of my pain now. So in that moment, your presence and your still quiet, just support, I think was probably the thing I remember more than anything because I felt, and I still fight a battle today. I've got constant things on my back and neck and everything else. But that moment was paralyzing. And I was like, I don't even know if, and so in fairness, I wasn't like suicidal or weird like that in that situation, but I was definitely like, 60 years old does not sound fun. And then for that moment, and I'll be quiet after this, but for that moment, I was like, well, if she's like this, I can make it till 60. I know that. And now we've had some wins with my back, even though it's still hard. So, all right. So let's just kind of hit this. Thinking about the situation with Jace, put into bed, thinking about the situation with me on the couch in the back. What does that communicate? What did that communicate to you? We'll both answer that question.
I think for me, it just communicated like you recognized and you saw something, and really there was a need that you could meet, and you decided you were going to meet it, and so it just, I think when your spouse is willing to do something like that, you just feel seen, you feel valuable, you feel like, oh, we're a team. Yeah. We can do this together. And so, even though I was tagging out and not going to put him to bed, but it builds trust.
That's good.
Where you can, that there's someone when life is hard that you can turn to.
Yeah.
And you can lean into. They may not solve the problem, but they can just walk with you through that season.
Yeah. So I would say almost the same thing. You just felt like you felt seen, you felt valued above everything else at that moment. In that moment, like I realized when my back was situation, I was like, this ain't gonna be easy for her either.
Yeah.
And because at the time I'm like, yeah, and I've said to you, but we've had private conversations I won't mention on here. I'm like, I don't know what the future holds for my body. And that's overwhelming at times. And so we just keep pressing along, but to know that you're not alone is so important. And so I just want to say, we gave away 10 ways to serve your spouse. So circling back, if you can't do these little things, like that needs to become a habit so that when these moments, we're pulling from something 6-7 years ago and 18 years ago now, that drastically changed the course of our marriage because of a servant mentality. I did that. We didn't talk about this. I did that because when I said, when do you feel the most loved? When do you feel the most respected? Both of them had some component of serving the other one.
Sure.
And so again, we didn't talk about this because I might not have been, if we didn't answer that the way we did, I wouldn't have been able to say what I just said. But we did. When you said, when you served me, and I said, when you saw me and said, I'm willing to serve you in this season, game changer for both of us. So anyway, we're going to keep digging, and we're going to talk about control issues, communication issues, boundary issues, and intimacy and sex issues before this thing is over. So if this is making a difference in your life, the Good Life Podcast, we want to have a good family. We want you to raise good kids. And I don't mean just good, I mean thriving family home. So like, subscribe, let someone know, and tune in next time for the Good Life Podcast. We'll see you then.